Right, and then um, welcome back. So the next session is entitled Conversations on Diversity and Inclusion. And this will be a presentation, or actually an interactive discussion from TESOL's Diverse Voices Task Force. So this task force was created last year after the Atlanta Convention, and it's charged with addressing questions regarding diversity, equity, and inclusion in TESOL. So in this conversation, the task force will present its draft of DEI principles and seek input from attendees regarding the DEI experiences, initiatives, and recommendations, thereby promoting inclusivity in all TESOL affiliates. So we have 4 members from the DVTF task force with us: Kisha Brown and Eric Dwyer, who are the co-chairs, Phoenicia and Yasmine Romero, who are members of the task force. So I would really like to welcome you and thank you for accepting to come to our events at such short notice. It was a great discussion, I think, during the online TESOL, the virtual convention. And I would like to thank you again for coming to the affiliate sessions and having more input from that, because that shows the inclusivity that your task force has been into. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. I'm hoping that folks can see, you're clearly seeing my screen now. Just nod yes, Georgios. Okay, good. Thank you very much. It's lovely to see you. Thank you very much and we very much appreciate the invitation. My name is Eric Dwyer. I'm an associate professor of foreign language education at Florida International University in Miami. I'm happy to introduce my colleagues who I adore, and that's me. And then Yasmine Romero is with us, Phoenicia Grant is with us, and Kisha Bryan is with us. Kisha chairs the task force along with me. And I admire and appreciate these colleagues greatly. As I said, I work in foreign language education. I was once on the TESOL board of directors as a convention chair, but that was a long, long time ago. And then Yasmine, you're on, right? What are you like?
I'm here in Hawaii, but I really enjoy looking at classroom conversations and navigating those particular conversations with intersectionality.
Mm-hmm. And Phoenicia is here as well, I do believe.
Yes, I am here. For whatever reason, my screen keeps leaving and coming back, but I am here. Hello, everyone. I'm so happy to be here today. I am part of the Diverse Voices Task Force subgroup charged with researching and making comparisons of peer organizations. So I can't wait to tell you more about that.
Okay. And then Kisha Bryan is here. Hey, Kisha.
Hi, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Can you all see me? Make sure my video is on. Okay. Yeah, you know, on behalf of the Diverse Voices Task Force of the TESOL International Association, we're honored to have been invited to this space and to share our work. We want to make sure that our work is not US-centric. As an international organization, we want to listen to and address the diverse needs of all of our affiliates. I currently, as Eric said, serve as co-chair of this amazing task force. And I'm also an assistant professor of ESL education at Tennessee State University in Nashville, Tennessee. And we're super excited to be here, and we're super excited to hear from you all, and we're happy that you're here with us.
Just to give you a little bit of an idea, we're gonna show you a brief video, then we'll have a discussion, and then we'll wrap up. How about that for an agenda?
Yes.
Okay, so what I'm going to do for the next, it's about 11.5 minutes, is show you a video. Are y'all ready for a video?
We're ready.
Okay.
Ready.
All right. Okay, technology gods, it's time for the technology gods to be nice to us. Hello, and thank you for choosing to participate in this update of work by one of TESOL's recent ad hoc committees, that of the Diverse Voices Task Force. In March 2019, at TESOL's annual convention in Atlanta, a teaching tip session included a presentation about offensive language in the classroom, a topic which many teachers struggle with and which the proposal reviewers felt would be appropriate. The language within the presentation was frank, and it included outwardly strong language instead of euphemisms. While such
The video stopped.
Yeah, I think it stopped.
Eric? Uh-oh. Okay, I think he's back. Eric, can you hear us? Okay. Okay, I would try to share my screen, but I think he has to stop sharing his. Let's see.
Kisha, would you like to share your screen?
Yes, let me see if I can try by sharing my screen. Let's see. Okay. It's saying that I cannot share my screen while the other participant is sharing.
Yeah, let me just.
I guess the technology gods wanted to act up for a little while. Let's see. Okay.
Let me, yeah, now you can share your screen.
Now I can share my screen. Okay, let me pull it up. Share screen.
So the technology gods acted up, is that right?
Yes. It's
You asked them, that's why.
I was afraid of that.
It's okay.
Oh, and it says no sound from some.
Hello, and thank you for choosing to participate in this update of work by one of TESOL's recent ad hoc committees, that of the Diverse Voices Task Force. In March 2019, at TESOL's annual convention in Atlanta, a teaching tip session included a presentation about offensive language in the classroom, a topic which many teachers struggle with and which the proposal reviewers felt would be appropriate. The language within the presentation was frank, and it included outwardly strong language instead of euphemisms. While such presentations may be appropriate under numerous academic conditions, including those in conference venues, this particular presentation occurred in the convention center publishers area, complete with microphones and people freely walking by. Of note was use of rap music lyrics, including fully uttered examples of the N-word, which many passersby, many of whom were local colleagues of African descent, easily noticed. The context of the presentation was not immediately apparent to the colleagues. For many, a white woman was openly using the N-word freely in a public forum. Of course, TESOL's leadership heard of this almost immediately. A follow-up meeting the Friday of the convention with then incoming TESOL President Deborah Healy, TESOL senior staff, and 8 African-American TESOLers, including several from Georgia TESOL, brought out more fundamental issues. These included diversity and inclusion in the adjudication process and broader representation at the convention and in various levels of TESOL leadership. In order to deal with these issues head-on, TESOL's leadership created the Diverse Voices Task Force. The task force was charged with the following: researching and reporting on ways that peer associations address diversity and inclusion and diversify their leadership, developing recommendations on how we can build a culture of inclusion across the association, identifying possible mechanisms the association can employ to develop diverse leaders for the benefit of the field and profession, and developing a vision statement on diversity and inclusion for the association. Within this vision statement, we asked 2 subsidiary questions. What does diversity and inclusion mean for TESOL International Association? And what are the different dimensions of diversity within the association? At the heart of the charge was a keen notion of developing recommendations with respect to how TESOL International Association can cultivate diverse leadership at all levels within the organization. In response to the charge to research and report on ways that peer associations address diversity and inclusion and diversify their leadership, the Diverse Voices Task Force conducted a systematic review of peer organizations. The task force identified and researched 5 peer organizations: the American Association for Applied Linguistics, the International Literacy Association, the Literacy Research Association, the National Council of Teachers of English, and the National Education Association. For these organizations, the task force reviewed the following artifacts: mission statements and strategic plans, leadership and governance documents, conference programs, themes, plenaries, awards and recognitions, initiatives, and statements on diversity, inclusion, and anti-discrimination. Based on this research, we have identified 4 strategic areas in which TESOL International Association can enhance diversity and inclusion within the organization. First, there's the strategic plan. Here, we look toward providing clear definitions for diversity and inclusion, developing strategic initiatives around diversity and inclusion, including SMART goals and implementation plan for each initiative, and providing a timeline for monitoring progress. Next, there's leadership. We believe that the nominating committee should consider expanding leadership opportunities for members from historically marginalized and underrepresented ethno-racial groups who are interested in leadership positions, and that the awards professional council should consider conducting a program audit on the leadership mentoring program, specifically to evaluate the success of that program. We address membership. We're thinking that the Membership and Strategic Communications Office should consider assisting in the promotion of communities of practice within the organization that have been historically marginalized in education and academia, and assigning a professional council or standing committee or creating positions committed to monitoring ethno-racial diversity and inclusion within the organization. We include reference to mechanisms, and by this, we mean namely those procedures necessary for reporting discrimination and perceived inequities. And finally, a promotion of academic and social justice principles at the same time. To this end, we look to being sure we're clear on definitions of the terms diversity and inclusion. The definitions of both of these words connote a gathering of disparate groups and individuals. It's clear that TESOL is comprised of people from seemingly innumerable backgrounds and needs, different countries, cultures, ages, professional interests, experiences, objectives, and on and on. There is practically no disagreement that TESOL is, in fact, diverse. However, TESOL is not always inclusive. Our idea of inclusion very closely parallels the dictionary definition. While TESOL does not actively exclude anyone, it passively continues to marginalize historically excluded groups. If TESOL is to be an association that is representative of its membership, then diversity is not a sufficient characteristic. In order to be truly representative of its membership in the different areas of the association, the task force feels that it needs to include historically underrepresented groups in the decision-making process and in the assignment of responsibility throughout the organization while fostering a sense of belonging. The different areas of the association are defined as its structure, for example, ISs for affiliates, products like publications and standards, services, meaning grants, scholarships, LDBs, and so forth, activities such as conventions, academies, symposia, and seminars, and leadership, namely the nominating committee, the board of directors, and professional councils. To make this happen, the task force asserts that TESOL must support diversity and inclusion at all levels. To this end, the task force has drafted 6 principles of diversity and inclusion based upon research from the like institutions and critically reflective discussions during Diverse Voice Task Force meetings from July 2019 through June 2020. Ultimately, the task force hopes that these principles can aid TESOL in reaching diversity and inclusion goals. They are the following. We will actively identify and challenge when we see individual or systemic acts of racism and other forms of discrimination and bigotry. These acts may be in educational institutions and within our profession. We will react to individual acts of racism, discrimination, and bigotry. We will challenge and work to dismantle systemic acts of racism, discrimination, and bigotry through external communications and publications. We will actively seek out and include the voices of non-white, marginalized, and underrepresented teacher scholars, administrators, and graduate students at all levels of the association. We will establish requirements for TESOL councils, committees, and board of directors, as well as TESOL office staff to engage in diversity and/or anti-racism training. Each TESOL entity will include policy statements regarding the value of inclusion and diversity as it relates to their roles. Annual reports from every TESOL entity will include progress toward inclusivity and anti-racist projects. We will create opportunities at association events and in professional development for alternative format presentations to include native speakers of other languages and world Englishes. We will support innovation and approaches to increase membership of historically underrepresented and marginalized peoples from around the globe. We will seek connections among different groups by fostering a climate of intergroup dialogue. As TESOL International Association reflects on its commitment to nurture a diverse and inclusive culture, such commitment will require the revision of the strategic plan to include a strategic action plan. This transformational change will allow the priorities of the association to be evidenced by the action of increased accountability. By increasing accountability and weaving diversity and inclusion into all aspects of the association, through the strategic action plan, the task force poses that TESOL International Association can begin to examine data that identify if strategic initiatives lead to a more diverse or inclusive environment. Further, by revising the TESOL strategic action plan, the task force believes that the association can communicate that diversity and inclusion as a shared responsibility and as a reflection of the association's core belief system. As a result, the task force has composed several tentative recommendations for the TESOL Board of Directors to consider. These include investing in an equity and inclusion audit, developing strategies and initiatives with regard to diversity and inclusion, assigning an oversight committee to ensure implementation of initiatives, conducting audits of the leadership mentoring program, providing outreach to minority serving institutions, promoting communities of practice, and eliciting demographic information from the membership. Now, the fact-finding, the establishing of diversity and inclusion definitions, and the contemplation of recommendations are only preliminary steps in answering the charge. We still have the most important step in the process remaining. That is asking you what you think. As such, we've created a survey which is to be sent to the membership and responded to. The survey isn't the smallest in the world, likely necessitating 15 to 20 minutes to complete. But it's similar to such surveys we've seen in other organizations and universities. All questions are optional, no personally identifying information will be part of the survey, and responses will be kept confidential. You should receive the survey on or around August the 10th. As mentioned, the task force has been in place for the better part of a year. The task force is made up of co-chairs Kisha, Bryan, and Dwyer. Through the year, the task force has been composed of Arlene Costello, Luciana Giolivera, Phoenicia Grant, Deborah Healy, Abdul Samad Humaydan, Sarah Kangas, Yasmine Romero, Mary Romney, and Federico Salas-Cisnardi. We also send huge thanks to our TESOL office coordinator, Rita Buckner. Thank you again for joining us for this presentation, and we really look forward to your contribution.
Cool beans. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you. Okay. Let's see, how do I?
So amidst all of this, let's see, who's on, Kisha?
Yasmine.
I am.
I apologize for the calls coming in.
You're okay. So I'm just going to speak briefly about the vision statement, and then we're going to move into the principles, because this session is really about getting feedback from everyone that's here, because we're actively working to revise and strengthen the vision statement as well as the principles, and attune them to local, national, and international needs. And so as you can see here, the vision statement, it's a sort of a snapshot of the statement. I want to emphasize that we state, TESOL will be a world leader in anti-racist, inclusive, and diversity-focused English language education. And I think this speaks to the vision statement as a whole, because we didn't want it to be a reactionary or just a position statement. We wanted it to be something that the TESOL Association can work towards, and that we can collaborate and work on, so that we are actively doing something about systemic racism and other forms of discrimination. And so, as you can see from this vision statement, we outline 6 principles that puts diversity and inclusion into action. And so our first principle, if we could move to the next, oh, thank you. This principle really asks the association to not only identify acts of racism and other forms of discrimination, but also take action or challenge these acts in a diversity of ways, from fostering conversations in local, national, and international methods or formats. And we wanted to ask, to what degree does this principle apply to your context, and how is this relevant to your context or the work that you do? And if you could just comment in chat, we're trying to track it as well. If there's, just take a few minutes to sort of think through potentially how this principle may apply or be relevant.
If there's something that you already do with related to this principle, please share with us. We would love to hear what you're actually doing in your affiliates and in your context.
Oh, and we have a question. Can you elaborate how we can do that, the first principle? So some ideas that we've had are coming up with ways to sort of unsee, or I guess re-see, how racism and other forms of discrimination and bigotry are institutionalized in practices at the association level, at conferences and things like that, and sort of trying to raise awareness of these issues. And so that may mean rethinking how we do how we review conference presentations, for example. It may be identifying ways to sort of maybe train people in diversity, inclusion, and equity efforts.
I know that one of the ways that TESOL has done this, the International Association has done this in the past, is that there were concerns about when we were having the job fair. Individual employers would ask for specific types of people for the positions that they were advertising in. The TESOL International Association actually, I think, wrote a position statement and made it so that these entities who were hiring could not say, I want this particular type of person from this particular racial background for these positions. And so it takes us standing up and reacting to it and reporting it for it to end.
And potentially doing those audits as well that we were talking about earlier could be one way to put this into practice. And then also how do these as individuals? And so one way that I could envision this, and that we've talked a lot about and are in the works of actually creating like a book, a reading group, in which people will work through issues of race and racism, and they have to do their own work as well as talk and open up with other people and figure out where these things are coming from and what sort of experiences or assumptions are inherent in the things that we do, and how we can actively see or unsee that and then rework it and reconfigure curriculum and things like that.
Your stories are highly important. Any story that you have in your own work, in your workplace, in your own experiences walking down the street, These are important stories. And then what Liz England mentions in the chat is that the stories of when you actually do something to address it. Maybe you have, or maybe you haven't. And both of those stories are important. If you didn't address it, there is probably a fairly good reason why you did. And even if you don't like that reason, it's worth talking about.
Right.
And so we also say, well, I did do something about it. Those stories and those models are also important. There's no bad answer to that question.
Yeah, and I think Lean brings up a really good point. It's still common internationally that many employers and parents expect native speaking teachers who look certain ways, i.e. white. And so figuring out ways to challenge that as an association means that there needs to be more work done to raise awareness about how racism is systemic, how it is, it textures everything that we do. And so also maybe to really rethink and re-see TESOL as a whole. And I think it connects with the next principle, and this might be a little bit more concrete because I feel like the first principle is really about identifying, challenging, and then thinking about ways. So it's more of like the research, kind of understanding where people are coming from, gathering those stories, whereas principle 2 is really about bringing everyone into those conversations at multiple levels in the association. Because in the previous presentation, we were talking about diversity profiles. What is the diversity profile of the executive board? And so this principle really tries to focus on that and think through ways to incorporate multiple voices, specifically those of non-white, marginalized, and underrepresented teacher scholars, administrators, and graduate students. And so I guess I open it up. I think it might be easier to connect with this principle potentially. What degree does it apply to your context? How relevant it is?
Yes, I'm appreciating, Gracia mentions issues of advertisements for jobs. And then there was another comment earlier, I believe in Peru, which is an interesting thing when we get into discussions of indigenous students and working with the indigenous professionals. These are conversations worth having.
Yeah, and this conversation also between Deborah and Lynn is really pointing to the fact that maybe these resources we don't even know. Some of the resources that have gone into effect are being used or disseminated, and we need to create more awareness about those particular aspects as well.
I believe Renee was raising her hand. I don't know if Renee is able to ask that question now.
Okay.
I didn't. If Renee, if you can't be vocalized, then go ahead and type it in the chat and we'll try to address it.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. I was just going to, I think the comment that I wanted to make, I think it was addressed in the chat. And I was thinking specifically, I think someone mentioned the issue of job opportunities. Particular organization that I was speaking to more recently was mentioning that one of the ways that they address things like accent discrimination or like nationality discrimination in hiring practices is that they allow teachers to post videos of their teaching so that people can first judge them as teachers and based on their strategies and their skill rather than the part of the world that they come from. And I thought that that was a very useful practice. So I just wanted to really share that as an example, as someone was asking for examples of how these principles might apply.
Thank you for sharing that. I think that it could be really worthwhile too to support teachers who do videotape or do have to work with technology. They may be unfamiliar, and those are some ways that the principle could also be put into action, and I can see how this could apply. Thank you.
Thank you, Renee.
I wanted to say another thing that we suggested as it relates to principle 2 is to do more outreach as it relates to minority serving institutions, historically Black colleges and universities, Hispanic serving institutions, just expanding our membership in these marginalized organizations.
Yeah. And in addition to that, I think mentorship is really important when we have individuals to come to conventions and to join us, you know, for a conference or session. It's important that we reach out to them and we volunteer to mentor them, because sometimes they don't know where to go, how to maneuver in the organization so that they can serve even when they want to serve. So as people who have been in the organization for a really long time, we need not doubt the power of mentorship and reaching out to individuals.
Yeah, and I want to emphasize that too, because for graduate students trying to publish and get a job can be really challenging. And so if we can bring mentorship into that realm as well, it can really help and support them as they navigate that process. Okay. Here's another comment from Arlene. I participated in a weekly conversation concerning institutional racism hosted by a public university. Oh, so like weekly conversations about institutional racism. So raising the awareness of that. Yes. Video lessons are hard to create. Maybe there's something TESOL could help with. Yes, I think so. I think also with everything that's happening, there may be more resources and more ways to strategize to do so.
And it also seems like it may be a form of discrimination, because if you have the credentials,
right,
and you have the recommendations, why would you need to, it just doesn't seem like the appropriate practice, because I know when I got my first teaching job, I didn't have to do that. So, I mean, it looks like we're adding an extra layer, and that in itself is a discriminatory practice.
right.
Yeah. Yes.
But I also say, in my experience as an ESL teacher, that I have experienced firsthand parents or even students thinking that because I am not a native speaker, that I'm not qualified, or I'm not at the same level. So it's a lot of things that's going on right now, especially politically. But these are not new issues. These are issues that have always been around. It's now that we had all of this going on in Atlanta last year in March, that we're approaching it again. But we are really hoping that that we can actually have these conversations, because until these conversations take place, we're always going to be where we were. So it's very important for us, being in the task force, to make sure that we are providing a voice to non-white and marginalized and underrepresented teachers and scholars, that we are having these difficult conversations, because when the conversations don't take place, discrimination is still taking place.
Right. Right. And language teaching and learning doesn't happen in a vacuum. I know that some people think it does, but it doesn't. And so we could have to continue to have these conversations so that we can be as inclusive as possible. So there was a comment, we may need to have a larger discussion at an international level. Ministries and/or governments have issued guidelines for specific passport holders. So that discourages candidates from even applying, right? And so that's definitely a discussion that needs to be had.
And I think challenging discussions are what needs to take place, like we keep echoing, and being able to do those conversations in ways that are productive and create action are very important and central to doing the work that the Diverse Force Task Force wants to do.
Right.
I did want to just bring up that somebody did say the idea of considering world Englishes for publications. works with this principle. So potentially also publication avenues, like a series that is actually dedicated to World Englishes and things like that could be another way to bring in or include voices that we do not hear.
Right.
Okay. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Great comments. Thank you.
Yes.
Let's see.
All right, so I had principle 3. And principle 3 just says that we'll establish requirements for TESOL councils, committees, board of directors, as well as TESOL office staff to engage in diversity and anti-racism training. So the main goal here is training the leadership. Now, we have some questions that are kind of guiding that process. Questions like, is teacher training and professional development reflective of the diversity both for staff and teachers and the learners? Does it reflect the needs of the staff and teachers? How often are locations for meetings and trainings changed to facilitate the attendance and participation by different populations? The reason that this principle is key is because in order for a proposal to be accepted, using the N-word, using homophobic vocabulary, that means that someone, the proposal reviewers, had to be reading it and thinking that it was okay. So what we want to do is we want to take a bad situation and turn it into a good situation. We want to make sure that everybody from the top to the bottom has diversity and anti-racism training. That is very key, because sometimes you don't know, you don't even know how to have those conversations. But we need to make sure that everybody has been trained and that everyone at least comes from a point where respect is there for all races and nationalities. Like I said before, I myself was a team leader when that incident happened last year. I felt very uncomfortable, both as the team leader of that presentation, and I thought to myself, where do I go from here? I'm going to do everything I can in my power to help everyone that I can so that this doesn't happen again. And that's why training is so important. But it cannot be, we train today. It needs to be something that's continuous and ongoing. But like I said before, we want to make sure that everyone is trained. And some of the professional developmental opportunities that we are looking at is having more cultural inclusive training, power dynamics, and training about white privilege. Opening up those discussions, being able to talk about Black Lives Matter versus All Lives Matter, not shying away from those conversations, because as I said before, those conversations, they're going to happen. So we might as well just have them openly, because racism does not just happen in the United States. Racism happens in every country. People are judged according to the color of their skin, according to, I mean, it's not just racism. They're judged according to their social status. They're judged according to their gender. They're judged according to their sexuality. And the more we avoid those conversations, the more we avoid that elephant in the room is just going to become bigger. So I think that this is a key principle to move TESOL in the right direction. Anyone, the question that we have for this is, to what degree does this principle apply to your context? And also, how is this relevant to your context or the work that you do?
And we're definitely aware that the context vary and diversity, equity, and inclusion will look different depending on the context. Please feel free to share. We're interested in hearing. Our board of directors is continuing to diversify and be inclusive, and we understand that members from the board come from varying countries. And so we want to make sure that they understand diversity, anti-racism, and as Phoenicia said, why that's so important within our international association. Let's see.
It looks like everyone is saying that's true. We can't shy away. So we'll go to the next principle if we don't have anything else.
Okay.
All right. Principle 4, each TESOL entity will include policy statements regarding the value of inclusion and diversity as it relates to their roles. Annual reports from every TESOL entity will include progress towards inclusivity, and anti-racist projects. And as it relates to TESOL and their commitment to nurture a diverse and inclusive culture, this commitment, as we said before in Eric's video, it will require the revision of the strategic plan to include a strategic action plan. So we need the action included into the strategic plan so that we can have a product to judge if it's actually happening. It's okay to include policy statements, but we want to see the progress. So that is why the strategic plan needs to transition to the strategic action plan. And how we came to that decision is we researched other peer organizations and we looked at their strategic action plans. And the three things that we found, the core principles that we found were: 1, they had clear definitions for diversity and inclusion. Clear as in it was just easy to understand. They also had SMART goals, which, if you're not familiar with that, specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and timely goals for each initiative. So every initiative had a goal and it was measured. And last but not least, we need a timeline for monitoring progress, follow-up, and redelivery to staff and members on SMART goal progress. So it is not enough to have a statement. We need to hold members, everyone that's a part of the organization, we need to hold them accountable. And the way that that is going to be done is by making sure that we have goals attached to our policy statements. That is very important. Now, yeah, I agree. Someone made a statement, it depends on the conditions in every country. That is very true. But as it relates to TESOL, TESOL needs to have an action. They need to have a strategic action plan. Because if we have a strategic action plan, we can review it annually to see if we're making progress. All right, let's see if we have any. So to what degree does this principle apply to your context? So one person said, it depends on the conditions in every country. In the absence of adequate know-how, some acts might end up magnifying an extent problem instead of meeting their inclusion goals. That's a good point. It's not enough to have a statement. Okay, thank you, Jennifer. And someone posted a video.
Yes.
An effort to deal with the hard conversation of color with a 5-year-old. Oh, I can't wait to watch that.
And I think for principle 4 and some of the other principles, we have to consider advocacy and to what extent, inclusion and diversity is a part of advocacy for ourselves, for the profession, for our students, and for our communities. And so, what does that look like in your particular context? Because we are sensitive to the contextual nature of issues and problems. By TESOL entities, do you mean affiliates? By TESOL entities, we mean both affiliates. We also mean the councils, we mean the intersections, and we mean the professional learning network. So all entities of the association. Okay. And we have lofty goals, but we have to start somewhere. In Morocco, for instance, color is not a problem as far as the job market is concerned. So if color is not the problem, is there a problem concerning dialect? Is there a problem?
Or gender.
Gender or religion? Okay, so Deborah said actually TESOL can't make a lot of demands on affiliates, but we would encourage affiliates to do this.
Age.
Age, yes, age.
Ageism.
Okay, it would be great for affiliates to work together. Absolutely. Okay, are we ready to go on to the next principle? Okay.
Okay, so principle number 5, we'll create opportunities at association events and in professional development for alternative format presentations to include native speakers of other languages and world Englishes. And indeed, part of our conversation has been with respect to non-native versions of English, or even just different versions of English that exist, regardless of whether it's native or not. Those types of detections are questioned. They're highly questioned in the operations that we've been discussing. And so what I'll ask you to put forth right now is, to what extent are you seeing, well, actually, you've already addressed this a little bit, but if you want to add to it, any conversations about non-native speakerism that is existing in your context would be highly valued. Also, other kinds of versions of English. And that includes context even within English-speaking countries, dialectism, as it were.
Right.
Going back to co-TESOL presentation, inclusivity would involve tolerance of native speakers of Western English.
Yep.
Right. In fact, it's always a very interesting conversation to see where the biases are, even among so-called standard kinds of English. Those types of debates still persist, and the reasons underlying them are etched in centuries of conversations that haven't ended yet. So, quite interesting comment there. Yes, the comment, non-native speakers are sometimes considered second-class teachers. And that's certainly a point. I think this may be one of the biggest issues that TESOL faces. Just the idea of the way that we advertise our own work, and the way that, because I mean, the research does not support that. The research only shows that these attitudes persist, but the research underlying whether non-native speakers or native speakers are better teachers does not fall into place. So we're then incumbent upon ourselves as professionals to make that point. How we make that point has not, is still up for debate as well. And that's probably one of the discussions that we're going to have, and it's going to depend on your own context. I think affiliates have a lot to say on that score.
Right.
Higher ed, Chinese students feeling discriminated. You know, it's really interesting. That is absolutely true. I had a Chinese student do a dissertation on that, and the dissertation was rejected by the graduate school as being inappropriate and not adding any findings to the literature. And we had to fight for her. And we finally got it through. So even in my own context at my own university, I had to fight over that particular issue. So yes, I completely agree.
Right, right. There's another comment. It rarely addressed bias as a degree of beauty. The degree of beauty can be a challenge sometimes. If you are conventionally beautiful, some might think you get a position thanks to your physical skills. Oh, interesting, right? Yeah.
What beauty is, right? How we construct it.
Right.
Really interesting.
Right. Whether or not you get hired based on, we're thinking racism, but it could be your size, right?
Mm-hmm.
We have a comment here about dealing with professional identity. I'm very happy to receive this comment because it adds to the conversations that we need to have.
Right.
I will tell you, we have not had that conversation, but I'm totally happy to engage in it. And Daryl, I'm happy to take your input regarding that. I'd love to understand more about that context and what the details are underlying it. Okay, in principle number 6, we'll support innovation and approaches to increase membership of historically underrepresented and marginalized peoples from around the globe. We'll seek connections among different groups by fostering a climate of intergroup dialogue. All right, so what we're hoping is that we're all talking to one another in spite of differences. And sometimes that has to be fostered. Sometimes it has to be a bit clinical in its creativity. My question to you all is, to what extent do you think that this principle might apply to your situation? Does this ring any bells?
Mm-hmm. You know, one of the things that I think that this virtual TESOL conference has done, convention has done, I think it's fostered a lot of intergroup dialogue that I don't think would have normally happened had we met face to face. And I'm so thankful for that, because I've been able to kind of connect with people who may not have made it to the convention this year. And so that's a start. I definitely think that's a start.
Mm-hmm.
And that's definitely an opportunity to work with alternative formats and see how we can create change and connections through those.
Right.
The most fun one to do.
Let's see.
No, this is by far the most fun principle.
Yeah.
It forces you to speak with people that you might not ordinarily speak with.
Mm-hmm.
And yet it's almost always productive. It's always totally illuminating. So I like this one.
Yeah. I mean, I think we're learning so much about one another and the various contexts in which we work, the issues that we face. And it's just not the privileged few who can make it to the convention.
Mm-hmm.
So I think this is a good thing.
Right, and Arlene brings up the idea of English as an additional language rather than other language. Arlene was a member of this committee, and appreciate her comments. Thank you, Arlene. It's lovely to have you here because we miss you. In the meantime, it also harkens to the presentation by Michelle DeGraff at the virtual conference, if you had a chance to see it, which brought up the conversation of the word other and the degree to which it affects people either positively or negatively. And it's okay for us to ask those questions.
Right. And we should. I mean, we should be looking within ourselves first and foremost, right? As an organization, an association, and as individual members, right? We must do that work.
Okay, 5 minutes. So.
Okay, so if you're interested in continuing this conversation, we hope that you're interested in continuing this conversation. Consider joining an intersection or PLN, professional learning network related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. There are tons of webinars that will soon be happening that have happened in the past weeks. You should expect to receive a diversity, equity, and inclusion survey. I believe it's for the membership. I'm not sure if it's for the affiliates if you're not a member of the association. However, we encourage the affiliates to kind of put together your own survey so you can see how you're doing with regards to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And stay tuned for more activities related to diversity, equity, and inclusion from TESOL. We have tons of groups interested in diversity, equity, and inclusion. We have the Diverse Voices Task Force. We're trying to do this work and push us forward. But we also have intersections, the social responsibility intersection, the non-native English speaker teachers, supporting students with disabilities, and refugee concerns. Each of these intersections tackle diversity, equity, and inclusion in their own way. And then we have the professional learning networks related, and they do work related to diversity, equity, and inclusion as well. We have the Black English Language Professionals and Friends group, PLN, and basically anyone can become a member of BellPath. We welcome anyone. We're interested in Black English language learners as well as Black professionals and the challenges they face in a day-to-day basis at work. TESOL Diversity Collaborative, the Faith in English Language Teaching PLN, the International Interfaith Palestinian Educators and Friends for Peace, Justice, and Reconciliation, and the LGBT and Friends PLN. So we are trying to do this work, and we are inviting you to come and join us. We also would love to have your feedback regarding what we are doing and how we can help the affiliates. We have selected resources on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and we must admit that they're quite US-centric. So we're looking for resources. We're looking for resources. So if you have resources to share, we ask that you drop them in the chat, or you actually contact any of the members of the Diverse Voices Task Force. We would like for you to stay connected with us. We would like to be invited again to any of your affiliate sessions or meetings. We just want to hear from you. And so if you have further comments or suggestions to provide, please do not hesitate to contact us. And we have a Google Doc specifically for those comments. I think that is it.
Ta-da!
Ta-da!
Thank you very much, everybody, for inviting us. We really enjoyed spending time with you.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure having the Diverse Voices Task Force with us. I think a lot of our members have expressed their need to have more conversations like this. So maybe we will invite you back again if you're interested in having another discussion. And for sure, we'll share the resources. And then there's lots of actions that are happening in affiliate associations. So I'm certain you'll be happy to get some feedback or some resources, whatever they're doing around the world. All right, just give us 1 minute and then we're ready to welcome Todd in 1 minute. Let me just pause the recording.